Hello all, my name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter and this is In Time. Thank you very much for joining me. Tonight we have decided we are going to dedicate the entire show to discussing the pandemic, COVID-19, and the latest variant, Delta. In particular, Delta because it has unfortunately changed a lot of the rules for COVID that we all believed quite strongly. I wear a mask, I'm okay. If I'm vaccinated, I'm okay. The people around me are okay. And it turns out that those things may not be true anymore. So, for me, just starting to get used to getting back to something called normalcy, including, getting time to do the stuff I want to do because, the kids are at home now all the time, right? And we have, everybody's lives have been completely upended and we get this short taste of freedom. And are we really talking about changing it? The pandemic is scary. It's terrifying. But the funny thing is, 100 years ago, and you can see a picture that we've put up here of in fact, 100 years ago, what is sometimes called the Spanish flu, the flu of 1918. We have a couple pictures that we'll be putting up throughout the show from that time, but they knew how to deal with it then. And this woman is wearing a sign that says, wear a mask or go to jail. Now, we've actually spoken about this before and what happened in Denver, where they had phenomenal success dealing with the pandemic at the time, and then bowing to pressures from corporations and from businesses. The governor of Colorado decided to reopen the state, and in that action lost more people than they had in World War I. Already, we've lost 50% more people than in World War II in this country. Which is odd because in World War II, we somehow managed to completely rebuild our economy so that we could wage war completely across the ocean. Nobody seemed to mind that then, and I understand we were fighting fascists, and it was obviously a very good cause. They wanted to take over the world and such, and I appreciate the idea of stopping people who want to take over the world. This is a virus that is killing a large number of people and to which no human being on the planet is immune. I think that's worthy of a World War II effort. And I think there are ways to do it and actually help the economy. Now, media interests, among others, have made this virtually impossible. It's very hard to get accurate news about this. Why? Well, honestly, even on the left, there are some interests who like hyping this up because it helps them get votes and because it helps them get views, it helps them get money. On the right, we have a lot of people who are denying it and who say, you know what, I could drown in my bathtub, and in fact, that's probably just about as likely of me getting COVID. And for our audience, most of you are probably aware, yes, that argument was used. I don't think that was Dr. Drew Pinsky, but his argument was not much better. At any rate, so I think I am as susceptible to magical thinking, to wish thinking, and saying, I would like to see us go back to where we were a few years ago. And all of us were that way on September 12th, 2001. This is worse. This is harder. This has changed our lives more. But the reason we are here is because of an inability to look at this seriously and say, what's it going to take? Because that's not new. They knew 100 years ago what it takes. The science on this hasn't changed a whole heck of a lot. We've got vaccines, and that's great, and they work great. We cured polio. So, great, science is doing awesome. But having said that, we know how to deal with pandemics. We haven't, and instead of just ignoring it, which is one option, or completely locking down the country, we split the difference and kind of flattened the curve, still overwhelmed, half the hospitals in the entire country, and have managed now to let this thing grow so much it is creating variants. As all species do, it is evolving, and the more of it that's out there, the faster it evolves. So now, Lambda, Delta, all these new variants coming out, and so now we have to have a discussion of where are we and what are we looking at going forward. Now, we have decided to demonetize this episode, so you won't see ads. during this episode. You cannot super chat to us during this episode. We're not interested in anything other than getting out the best information that we can to you about where are we now, and if for some reason President Biden doesn't want to take our call and won't listen to us about what we think he should do, at least you have some idea for you and your family of what we're looking at and can take a sober look at what is the greatest medical crisis. And it's been this for a while. This isn't a shocking statement. The greatest medical crisis on this planet in 100 years. We have on as a guest today, homozygote. That was, I apologize, took me a second on the name. So without further ado, yeah, and we don't have an image for you, so we'll just have your audio here. He told me backstage he didn't want to be seen with me, and I will try not to take it personally. But I just want everyone to know that he's the guy who said it.
I wouldn't do you dirty like that. No. As much as I want to be seen, I'm actually, I'm live streaming right now on Twitch, so it's a technical error. So I'm visually present in another place, but audio wise, I'm here with you.
You're okay. Yeah, so you're that's a talent. So your face is in one thing. Usually it takes a catastrophic fuck up in time for that to happen. We call that Tuesday. At any rate. All right, well, thank you very much for joining us. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and your interest in COVID?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Marcus. My online handle is homozygote, spelled like the animal, not like two copies of a particular allele. My current state in education, I am a third-year PhD student at the University of Vermont. I am studying cellular and molecular biology. My actual dissertation research is in neuroscience, but all of my education prior to this was in microbiology, which also, of course, incorporates immunology and virology. So a lot of my formal education has been in the realm of really small germs and the immune system and what has to happen for one to fight the other. So my interest in COVID actually really just began kind of like any other ordinary citizen. I was traveling for spring break at the time, and I had kind of been paying attention to what was going on overseas in China a little bit on and off. And I saw there was this new respiratory thing that was happening, and I was trying to keep abreast the best ways I could, even with whatever scientific connections that I have. And I really wasn't all that much more informed than anybody else. So I do remember, just out of paranoia, if it was starting to leave China or escape China, as I had heard in the news, start leaking into Europe, I wanted to not take any chances. So I do remember really when it kind of set in for me that this is going to be a big deal was when I was shopping in the Costco. I was trying to stock up on food before everybody else. I think my my training kind of gave me a little bit of a head start on the paranoia, as it were. But from there on out, once I knew it was going to be big, I just kind of channeled my inner nerd, and I have just been consuming the scientific literature on COVID ever since it really, I think, hit the scene. So the way I kind of advertise myself, both on Twitch and elsewhere, is I'm somebody who is at least fluent in the language of science. I don't necessarily have all the answers, and I'm not trying to, of course, give anybody medical advice that you shouldn't at the very least go and discuss with your physician. But at the same time, too, I think I can give a little bit of clarity and help people kind of understand the world around them. So I think that's very much in line with what you said as far as what this discussion is hopefully to be about over the course of the show.
We have our first troll. Oh dear Lord, this guy is we've been trying to not lock him down for a while. His name is MathPig, and it's just And so I said that you couldn't super chat, and he decided to prove me wrong and gave us $1 super chat. So first of all, and then said, "Don't tell me what I can't do." So thank you, MathPig, for your support and for the $1 super chat. I had honestly thought that shouldn't work because we did demonetize this show. So I will look into it. It's demonetized, so nobody should be getting ads, and we should not be getting revenue from it. If for no other reason, then I really genuinely don't want to be accused of sensationalizing anything. I would like people to hear what it is we're talking about. I think it's important, and I think that's something that people who watch us regularly understand how and why, and so. But thank you, MathPig, for ruining it. The show's over, folks. We're going. I really appreciate everything you've done, MathPig. Just ruin the show for everybody. Let's go. All right. I'll try to keep. I tell too many jokes, especially during serious shows. So, all right. Well, thank you for explaining that. So, um, I assume that you, at some point, started to get rather concerned about what you were learning about COVID. And could you just tell us briefly what is? Oh, sorry, and it was a pound, not a dollar. If I said a dollar, I misspoke. What was that like, and what were you seeing when you started to realize that we were facing a global pandemic?
Yeah, I think what really kind of tipped me off, what made me concerned in the first place enough to start stocking up on food, was the fact that it seemed to be escaping the country, China, where it had actually originated from pretty rapidly. So usually, if a pathogen kind of transcends borders like that, if it kind of surpasses these artificial boundaries we've all drawn for ourselves to live in, at that point, that's when I kind of thought, considering how interconnected the world is, we all travel by plane. And of course, there are other methods of travel, but planes happen to be pretty damn common, and they're wonderful in terms of being basically flying vectors in the sky. So I thought, once it hit Europe, it was only a matter of time before it hit the United States. And that's when I was really concerned, and that's when I again started to stock up on food. I think my concern actually kind of accelerated when I was traveling for spring break, because that's when some of the first cases were starting to be described in the United States. So I kind of thought to myself, I'm flying on a plane, the same thing that I kind of knew was a possible route to transmit this virus from one country to another. So I kind of thought to myself, did I actually kind of get ahead of the curve? Did I beat the pandemic in terms of my plane travel? And thankfully I did. But when I started to feel paranoid about being on a plane, that's when I think when it really, really, truly set in. Scientifically, I think, again, it kind of goes back to the idea that it was able to spread to other countries pretty rapidly very early on.
Well, and this is one thing I have a theory. It's going to sound like a joke at first. It's not, which is that most pandemics hit liberals first and conservatives last. And the reason is because liberals tend to concentrate in larger cities. When you're in more cities with greater population, you are bumping around with different people, different ideas, and you are forced to engage with, oh my God, homosexuals, trans people, people of different races and colors. That this is in all of the major ports, all the major cities, Boston, LA, stuff like that. And that's also where a virus is going to hit first for all of the same reasons. And so what we saw was in most on the coasts and the most liberal areas of this country, we saw the virus going first. And it seems to me, and it suggested no politics, so shame on you for bringing it up, but it seems to me that if it had been hitting conservative areas first and more rapidly, a conservative president may have taken further action. As it was, I think it was harder, perhaps in addition to ideological differences aside. It was harder for them to grasp because Kansas wasn't getting hit early on at all, and there's a reason for that. It's Kansas, and so I think there was a bit of a lag, especially in conservatives who also, in general, prefer that the federal government stay out of local affairs. Does that sound reasonable to you? And do you think that that in any way contributed to perhaps a lag in taking this seriously, at least in more conservative areas?
Yeah, I do think there's some component of that, of course. I think the real question to ask is whether it's a matter of geography and population density, or whether again it's kind of a matter of personal politics and potentially spirituality as well. There are certainly no shortage of people who decided to put their faith in religious entities to sort of deliver them from a pandemic. But again, I think as far as the initial spread is concerned, yeah, of course, it's going to hit the most population dense areas first. Those are the coasts. The first outbreaks were in, I think, Kirkland, Washington, and then the state of New York, I think, got really overrun shortly after that. And then, of course, every metro area kind of started to see an outbreak, and that was that. That's what kind of established transmission of the virus that has still, of course, sustained itself in varying degrees to present day. So as far as, the people at the top, Trump and his administration, yeah, I think there's definitely some evidence of that, and I think they're probably content strategically to let it burn through the blue areas, as it were. But at the same time too, we're talking about a president who thought that his body has a finite supply of energy, and so he shouldn't exercise because that would deplete his finite supply of energy. So I think it's really a combination of both ghoulish political strategy and just general ineptitude.
Thank you so much for reminding me of that. That's really what I needed today.
Sorry.
And we, of course, are home of the senator who said we don't need to respond to global warming because God will protect us. A U.S. senator, a Zandering person. Okay, a Sandering person. I'm going to get that right someday. Probably not today, but I will get that right. $10 US. I see your pound and raise you 6.19 pounds. Thank you very much, Sandering. And Sandering another 5. You can't tell me what to do either. Oh, dear Lord. Yeah. Okay. Well, you're meeting our audience. All right. So, all that aside, Trump said that he got advice that the best way to do this, to handle this pandemic as it was growing up. First, actually, he said it wasn't a pandemic. Then he said it was a pandemic, but he solved it. Then he said he was the first one to recognize it was a pandemic. Then he tried to defund the World Health Organization because that's what you do when you're in the middle of the worst health crisis in 100 years. And then actually said that it's going to kind of take care of itself. And what we learned, and I don't want to cover too much on the past because Delta is important, but I want people to understand how we got where we are. He then, internal memos showed that a number of people suggested to him that herd immunity was the way to go with this, and that what we should do is actually get people as sick as possible, as quickly as possible, and what that would do was encourage herd immunity where we would no longer have to worry about the problem. He said, A, this would answer COVID, B, this would keep our economy intact. Are either of those true to the best of your understanding?
Yeah, so I do remember some of this actually coming out long after the fact that the Trump administration sort of internal strategy was to engage in the quote-unquote natural/herd immunity approach, where they just wanted the virus to infect literally as many people as humanly possible to try and give them immunity to it the hard way, which of course is the least desirable approach because that inflicts a ton of human suffering upon everybody. So if we're talking about the veracity of that strategy, is that something that's actually a legitimate approach? Of course, we could kind of frame it as like a science experiment, right? Do you want to let a pathogen burn its way through a population and hope that it hits a wall at the very end, or do you actually want to, in the form of something like a vaccine, actually give that population some protection so you artificially sort of, not to steal a word from Trump, but build that wall?
Oh,
and,
for fuck's sake!
Keep the virus out.
You realize our tradition on this show is to ban anyone who says those words in that order. I think I'll get you a mulligan, but
basic words, okay.
Oh, actually, you know what? That's a noble cause. That's a noble cause. I believe bigly in that cause, and I wish you the best of luck.
I appreciate it. I think we should all reclaim the English language from people who abuse it as such. But essentially, there's really not that much scientific merit to that natural infection strategy, simply because there are so many people in America, as we're kind of seeing right now. We're already dealing with variants and mutations. Anytime the virus has an ability to infect another person, it has another ability to replicate. And when that happens, that you're risking that by random chance the virus will pick up some mutation that might help it in the long run. So in general, the public health and the scientific strategy is to, of course, try to stamp out transmission as much as possible. So going into it with the opposite as plan A certainly, of course, makes things worse. There's no conceivable reality where that helped.
All right, and I want to focus on that for just 1 second, too. So that strategy has the downside, additionally, of improving the chances of variants. Is that correct?
Sorry, go ahead and repeat that question.
The herd immunity strategy, the idea that, hey, let's infect as many people as quickly as possible to try to, also has, as opposed to the let's either mass social distancing and or some form of lockdowns, however we deal with that, and vaccines. Of those two strategies, the other problem is the herd immunity one increases the chances of variants. Is that correct?
I mean, I can't say that like definitively because obviously, nobody has a crystal ball, but it certainly lends itself to that happening. Again, anytime the virus has a chance to spread and replicate, it has a chance to mutate, and that, in theory, could lead to variants. So there's kind of a couple, leaps in logic that I would be making if I was to say it would definitively increase the chance of a variant, but it's certainly adjacent to that. So it's certainly not a good thing, and we should avoid it for precisely that reason.
What's a variant?
So when we talk about variants, we're scientifically referring to just a virus that has changes in its genetic code compared to the quote unquote original virus that came from Wuhan. So, just as a frame of reference, from Wuhan, there were two different versions or lineages of the virus. I think they were termed A and B. And then A actually pretty quickly died out. And I think the reason why is because lineage B picked up one mutation. It essentially became a variant compared to lineage A, and that mutation helped it become more transmissible. And so because of that, lineage A was largely outcompeted in an evolutionary sense and is now sort of functionally extinct. So lineage B is what has taken over pretty much the majority of the world. I think we're not going to get nitty gritty into the taxonomy of these variants, but generally speaking, a variant is simply categorized by changes in the genetic code in reference to a different version of the virus. So for the most part, all of the viruses we're talking about now are variants compared to the original virus that came out of Wuhan. But again, if we want to talk about within a certain variant classification, right? We're dealing with Delta, and there's like 4 different subversions of Delta right now. So simply that's just kind of like a nerd thing, right? It's how scientists kind of classify these things to make them more distinct entities to look at and surveil.
Now, in general, if a variant is no, so now am I correct when I say, like, for example, the wild type is essentially the depending on how you choose to classify the original one. The wild type is sort of the original before any serious variants came out, and then there are the variants. So the wild type we really don't even see much anymore. Is that right?
Yeah. So I mean, you could kind of describe it like that. That wouldn't like be too far off. I think that the scientific community has kind of reframed all of that. They've kind of ignored lineage A that's died off, and they framed the very first version of lineage B, which does have that mutation that made it more transmissible. That is now sort of the wild type or the default reference COVID, for a lack of a better way to put it.
All right. So now these variants, it seems to me, if I understand evolution correctly, in general, I mean, there are probably loads of variants, but many of them die off. That's kind of how evolution works. As it reproduces, there's going to be all sorts of changes, and then the real quote variant is one that manages to find traction somehow. And usually, if it finds traction, the reason is because it has some advantage over the others. Is that right?
Yeah,
evolutionary advantage, kind of not advantage to us, but yeah I'm sorry, I cut you off there. But,
yeah. No, I mean, this is kind of the basic definition of natural selection, right? An organism, whether we're talking about humans or a bird or, in this case, a virus, in its environment, if we're talking about, again, inside of a person, right? Any random thing that happens by chance that allows an organism to gain an advantage in its environment is what is going to be selected for, because by virtue of having said advantage, every other organism in a population are going to be at a relative disadvantage. So in that case, yeah, that's basically what we're in. We're, as I kind of describe it to people all the time, we're in a live evolution experiment, and we've been unfortunate test subjects for the last year and a half in said experiment. We're simply the the environment in which the virus is evolving. Now, of course, it's not entirely hopeless. Of course, we do have defenses and we can fight back, but that brings up the whole idea of evolutionary pressure and how viruses, again, adapt to their changing environments because of said pressure. So all that to say, yeah, we're in a big evolutionary arms race right now.
Well, and being a species that takes longer to procreate, a virus can procreate reasonably quickly. We can't. So it makes it presumably a little harder for us to adapt. We can still adapt, but the costs are, in terms of human life, I would imagine, are reasonably high.
Yeah, if we're talking on a population level, then yes, there's actually some really interesting literature kind of talking about the virus and immunocompromised people, for example, whose people whose immune systems aren't entirely functional, and they're actually able to sort of track real-time evolution of the virus based off of changes in its genetic code, even over the course of a 2-3 week treatment. because again, there's kind of that back and forth, that push and pull in people. So actually, if we kind of zoom in a little bit on a microcosm or on a very small scale, we can actually see the evolutionary war play out. But again, if we're zooming back out in terms of a population level, really, I think a lot of what we do in, I guess to say like how we adapt, right? If we're talking about that, that's actually kind of separate from the biology, which is funny, right? We were talking about society building vaccines, kind of what you were alluding to off the air before we went on about whether or not we, lock things down, for example, right? A lot of how evolution in this context is actually working is seemingly separate from the biology. So I just kind of find that a very interesting talking point as well.
Titan, quote, people say they don't want to be vaccinated because they think they're being experimented on. Now they're our control group. Ouch. Yeah, I think that's probably true. Ouch, but yeah. All right, so now just to put a fine point on it, I think most people probably understand this by now, but any variant that has a better chance of survival, that's usually because they make it worse for us. This is that arms race that you were talking about. So they're anything that helps the virus hurts us, and it's been helped along by these variants. So could you give me just a brief rundown of what some of the variants are that we're looking at right now, and just compare and contrast them to each other?
Yeah, so there are a fair amount of variants that have kind of overtaken the virological landscape, right? We scientists are really not good at naming stuff, so we actually kind of changed the naming scheme about halfway through the pandemic, and I think confused everybody a little bit unnecessarily. So previously, we kind of referred to variants based off of where they were discovered, where they were first characterized. So we had the UK variant, the South Africa variant, and then the Indian variant, which is now Delta. So we've decided to hopefully remove the geography-based stigma that goes along with this nomenclature, and use the Greek alphabet. And sorry, I actually just got rated on Twitch, so my notifications were playing. So as far as variants, we've renamed them. I think the UK variant is now Alpha. I think the South African variant is I want to say it's either Beta or Gamma, and then the Brazilian variant is the other one of those. But the only reason why we're really talking about Delta is because that has become more transmissible, right? It's the most transmissible variant that we've seen on the planet, and there's a reason why it's kind of overtaking most countries, becoming the dominant variant. So as far as kind of what's on the horizon, Delta Plus is a thing. There are, I think, 4 Delta Plus like subvariant lineages that have been sort of cataloged that do exist and do have some additional mutations in them of unknown significance. Lambda is another one that people were talking about as well, but that one does not seem to be as transmissible as Delta for the time being. So that's actually kind of a good thing. But generally speaking, I think we're kind of reaching some zenith of a viral evolution of some sort. So Delta, I think, is kind of representative of that right now, because we're seeing, again, the most transmissible version of the virus yet.
We heard some of the most dangerous, I think, actual misinformation. One of them, in my view, was that you wear a mask to protect yourself. It turns out they do offer some protection to the person wearing them, but in general, that's not why we wear masks. We wear them to protect other people. Now, the CDC seems to have indicated, and maybe walking this back, but indicated, and this was, I think, the general scientific consensus was, once you were vaccinated, you didn't have to wear a mask because you couldn't get COVID and therefore couldn't pass it on to other people. So you didn't have to wear the mask. What's the current thinking on that?
So, I mean, I'm definitely going to try to still adhere to your no politics rule, but this is an issue that has been heavily politicized.
Listen,
the pandemic.
This is a no politics zone. Trump. Oh Jesus, I'm not feeling well. Excuse me. Sorry, I didn't. No, I would like to try to keep politics out of it, only because our primary concern is education. But we're also aware that everybody, including the host, has strong political views. So, but say what you have to say and be as accurate as possible. But yes, please.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of the original, quote unquote, science or lack thereof at the start of the pandemic. We were kind of facing this issue with conserving the available masks for healthcare workers, right? That was a big concern. We wanted hospitals and other healthcare facilities to stockpile available masks to obviously, keep themselves protected. So scientifically, we kind of knew there was a benefit. If we wanted our healthcare workers to stockpile it, that obviously has to happen for a reason. Generally speaking, in sort of other, I think predominantly Asian cultures, people do wear masks as a courtesy, right? When they're sick or they're coughing, kind of like you just did there, they would wear a
I don't know
mask
what you're
to, at
talking
the very
about.
least.
I thought
They
you
wear
couldn't
masks
see.
at
Wait,
least.
wait, 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 wait. Whoa, 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 whoa.
I can see you, but you have to go to the Twitch page to see me.
So,
sorry
so you've been watching this whole
number on
time.
there.
Okay, no, it's all right. That's all right. Hold on. All
I
right.
see what you did there.
I'm sorry. I was. All right.
No,
So,
you're fine. You're fine. It's all good fun. But
so
no, like with
please
masks,
continue.
we kind of knew. Like we had an idea that if you're sick, if you wear a mask, you keep whatever you're hacking out from being spread everywhere. So this is a thing that culturally, I think, has definitely happened over time, and this is not new to the planet. So with all that being said, eventually the White House Coronavirus Response Task Force, whatever they were called at the time, headed by Fauci, they did have a scientific meta-analysis sort of roll in that did recommend that the general population use masks, right? They recommended that for that reason, that it keeps whatever you might have in and doesn't allow you to spread it to others, that it would be a good idea. So I think from there on out, people seem to have this notion that masks only helped prevent you from infecting other people, which is true, right? That there's nothing wrong with that. But eventually the CDC did some more research. Scientists also did some more research, and they did also denote that masks do protect the wearer to some extent from things coming in. So it all, of course, also depends on the type of mask. You could talk about cloth mask. You could talk about an N95. You could talk about half face or full face respirators. Right? There are all sorts of different varieties of masks. So the varying efficacy of a mask, of course, depends on what you are actually wearing. So all that to say, masks of any kind do, of course, prevent you from spitting stuff out. It does offer you a non-zero amount of protection from stuff coming in. But again, masks are, of course, not a magical force field by any sense. They're not foolproof. They are not perfect. And I also kind of want to frame it in the sense that masks, in addition to other measures, or as scientists call them, non-pharmaceutical interventions in the most elaborate and verbose way possible, all of these non-pharmaceutical interventions stack with each other. They're supposed to be additive and not just one or the other. So people also, I think, got this idea that, hey, this vaccine's here. It's great. I'm going to go get it, and then I'll be protected. That means I don't need my mask. And now here we are, where the CDC is recommending, 85% of all counties in the United States to put masks back on again. I just got an email from my university saying that indoor masking is now mandatory once again. And they're, I think, also reinstating COVID test procedures regardless of vaccination status. But all that to say, masks are certainly something that do have some degree of efficacy. They do help, and they should be with us indefinitely. They are definitely a tool in our toolbox to help us fight against the virus.
Well, and if as I understand it, if we had actually started from when COVID first hit the United States with no social distancing measures, other than to say everybody had to wear a mask everywhere in this country, that public, private, businesses, public spaces, everyone had to wear a mask, we would have, if I understand it, reduced COVID deaths by 90% just by masks alone if we had started on day one. Does that sound like a ballpark figure there, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds plausible. I will say that definitely sounds plausible, and without actually digging into the literature, I couldn't necessarily endorse that statistic. But it would have helped. It absolutely would have helped, and I think it would have helped in spades. For something that is so simple, something that is so easy to execute for the average American, and for something that does have an effect, yeah, that absolutely, masking and distancing simultaneously at the very start would have definitely saved lives, unequivocally.
I think I may have failed on I think it was masking and distancing reduced it by 90%, but we did a show on that, and someone may have that in the live chat. We'll see. So we're now seeing the numbers go up, and if memory serves, we are at about 40% the infection rate of where we were at sort of at the height of the pandemic, on or around January 7th or mid-January. So This is now purportedly due to the Delta variant. What about the Delta variant is making it that this is climbing, especially since ostensibly roughly 48% of the United States is vaccinated?
So one of the biggest factors with Delta right now is the fact that its mutations, or I think there's one mutation in particular. I was actually just talking with someone in my chat because they had a question about the paper that kind of illustrates this fact. But there's one particular mutation that the Delta variant has picked up. Scientifically, it's denoted as L452R. You don't necessarily have to remember that, but for any nerds out there, you can actually dig into that a little bit if you're so interested. But this is actually described in the context of an earlier variant in the pandemic that came out of California. This variant in California only really had this mutation among its suite of mutations that had any impact as far as the virus's ability to spread and infect people. And the scientists noted that this mutation increased the amount of virus an infected person sheds by at least a factor of 2. So when we kind of contextualize the
Double
for
mutation, people who don't speak science, nerd, factor of 2. We're all very impressed with your thank you. Yes, please continue.
Yeah, I mean, it multiplies the virus by 2, right? The amount of viral particles coming out of your nose and lungs, it gets multiplied by at least 2. So yeah, it at least doubles the amount of virus you're shooting out. So if something like Delta, for example, right, we kind of touched on this earlier, but it came from India. So if at a different point in the world, a different geography, the virus acquired that mutation by chance as well, that's a term called evolutionary convergence. So that really emphasizes that scientifically this mutation probably has an advantage to viruses that do bear it. So in that sense, it's really that mutation that's kind of driving the surge right now. So if we talk about, right, we're at 40% of what numbers were for our winter spike. How does that mutation allow case rates to look like this? Well, especially in the setting of many people in America, not enough, unfortunately, but many being vaccinated and fully vaccinated at that, right? When you get a vaccine, right, your immune system is kind of taught what to look for. Your immune system is sort of on the hunt and ready to go. But if it gets exposed to at least 2 times as much virus compared to other versions of COVID, that increased amount of virus might have the ability to at least temporarily overwhelm your immune system and sort of establish an infection and gain a foothold to get you that breakthrough case that's been, of course, said all up and down the news media. So that's generally that's generally what's going on right now. It's the viral load in particular, the increased viral load that is driving what we're seeing right now with Delta.
And what is a breakthrough case, please?
So breakthrough case means that despite being vaccinated against any illness, in this case it's COVID-19, you still get sick. So the virus broke through the immunity given to you by the vaccine. So that's what the word is generally used to mean colloquially. I'm sure there's some other finer nuance points, but we're not here to discuss scientific nomenclature.
Yeah. Well, actually, no. Let's discuss scientific nomenclature for the next 10 minutes. And wow, our sub rate holy smoke! I've never seen a channel shed that many subs in 10 seconds. At any rate, so come on, that was funny. Some people have no sense of humor. So as I understand it, one of the issues with that then is that so you can get enough. Your body has to, if you get infected, your body has to identify that it is under attack or that there is a foreign element that is, allergies, you're not under attack, but your body thinks you are. But so it identifies that there is a foreign element that it wants to get rid of. It responds to this, and there is a delay between that. And if you're exposed to double the amount of COVID, sorry for lack of a better, I'm sure there was a much more elegant way to frame that, but I'm not getting points tonight for elegance. So if, it's going to take longer for your body may take the same response time, but more to ramp up and deal with it. Is it possible and or even common for someone, therefore, to actually have COVID in their system? They've been vaccinated, but they don't show any symptoms and maybe think they don't have it because, hey, I had a vaccine, how could I get it?
Yeah, so that is definitely something that is A, technically possible, and B, has happened. I think people were talking about this in light of the recent outbreak that the CDC described in Provincetown, Massachusetts, where they do note some instances of vaccinated people transmitting the virus to other vaccinated people, and that's really what spurred this recent guidance change as far as whether or not people should be wearing masks again. That's coming from the CDC. That's one piece of data. The other one being that the vaccinated folks who tested positive and the unvaccinated folks who tested positive have identical viral loads, which goes back to what we were just talking about, suggesting that again. At least 2 times the COVID from Delta from any one sick person is leading any person to sort of have similar amounts of virus if they actually do get sick. So if we're talking about asymptomatic transmission, that of course is something more nebulous, right? That's been a lot harder to pin down and is still, I think, a moving target, right? Scientists have not really been able to pin it down all that much, and that's really at the core of COVID. What makes it so insidious is because people, even if they're vaccinated, can still technically transmit it without knowing, which also underscores the utility that mask wearing has. So if you don't know you have something, the mask will hopefully at least keep it inside of you if you do. But all that to say, it is happening. To what extent is, I think, more difficult to answer. The trend seems to be that even despite all of this, I don't want to necessarily call it hubbub because there is some substance in all of this discussion about the outbreaks in Massachusetts and the CDC's subsequent change in recommendation. But people, I think, also need to realize that vaccinated people still are getting sick at much, much lower rates than unvaccinated people. And when you talk about that, right, the vaccine, again, teaches your immune system what to look for. And if you were to get sick with Delta compared to an unvaccinated person, your immune system is able to ramp up a lot faster compared to an unvaccinated person because it already knows exactly what it's going after. And by virtue of that, people who do get breakthrough cases, and whether they're asymptomatic or not, are going to sort of clear the virus much faster. At least that's the sort of scientific assumption that we are operating under based on just generally speaking how the immune system works. And the CDC data that they had in their internal presentations were actually evidence of that. They did note that vaccinated folks did have, I think, a quicker viral clearance time. So generally speaking, things are kind of functioning as intended when it comes to the vaccines. And really at this point, it's just the virus that's changing. So it's kind of changing how we look at what the vaccines are doing for us. And one of those things that the vaccines can do for us to an extent, but they're not perfect at, is reduce transmission. So all that to say, it's still possible. It can happen from vax person to vax person, and that is largely one of the reasons why the CDC has, again, recommended mask wearing in areas where there are high transmission, which is most of the country right now. So,
well, and that was the interesting one too. Is of course, that was what once again Trump was just like, well, if masks work, why do we need anything else? And what you had said earlier is it's part of a toolbox. It's not. There's no one. We don't have a silver bullet to this one. We need to do many things simultaneously. So we also have, there's a lot of confusion I've found about the vaccination numbers. And the reason why is oftentimes when people talk about how many are vaccinated, what they really mean is how many are vaccinated in the U.S. of those who can get the vaccine. But not everyone can get the vaccine, most notably children. I believe it's under 18 because we don't have any data on as to whether or not it's safe for them. There's some indication it may not be. We just don't know. So children under 18 are not getting. Actually, that can't be true. Sorry, it's got to be. I think it's what's the age? It's not 18.
12 and over.
Okay, 12. All right, perfect. So thank you for the correction. So so there's a portion of the population that will never get vaccinated, at least unless we solve that issue. So there will always be a portion that is in fact vulnerable. And there are other issues, people who are allergic to vaccines for one reason or another, or have other reasons they can't take one. So it sounds like, at least in this situation, you could have, and we don't know the rates, and I certainly don't want to suggest that, let's not everyone hair on fire. This is happening all the time. It's one of the reasons we turned off the monetization, because otherwise, hey, are you prepared to say that we're all going to die? Why, Nick, I wouldn't say we're all going to die, but that aside, so it looks like this can actually go from vaccinated person to vaccinated person to vaccinated person to someone who does not have the vaccine, meaning that on some level, it appears that asymptomatic vaccinated people can, in fact, be vectors for this for people who are not vaccinated. Is that roughly accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could kind of view it as a Mexican standoff in the sense that transmission could go any which ways. The way I've kind of described it to people as far as what they should do in terms of modifying their own behavior is that treat it like we're back at like square 1.5, right? We're not back to pre-vaccine era COVID, but we can transmit in a way that is similar to pre-vaccine era COVID. The big benefit we have right now is, of course, the vaccines are overwhelmingly effective at keeping people alive and out of the hospital, which is, of course, a marvel. It is a scientific, technological marvel that we've been able to collectively, as the institution of science, crank out vaccines this fast for a brand new pathogen in the most record time ever, largely because of technological advances and prior research. So all that to say, again, for most people, yeah, I would still be cautious as far as congregating, and I would still, again, recommend following CDC guidelines to wear a mask if you're in a high transmission area. For the most part, again, that's going to be most places in the U.S. So,
As a result of the high transmissibility of COVID, let's just say, assume for, I think going forward, unvaccinated, or just, we won't go into the really cray-cray things, but it's clearly going up. It's now the vast majority of cases in the U.S., the overwhelming majority of cases that are in the hospital. Some states are finding their hospitals overwhelmed again, much like they were on January 7th. Back then, we had Los Angeles County Hospital lost its oxygen supply because they had so many people on oxygen. As you use oxygen, of course, the pressure drops in the system. As the pressure drops, this partial pressure, it gets colder, and the entire system would freeze up, and their whole system just froze. It got so cold as it was delivering, so they lost the ability to give oxygen to any patient who needed it, not just COVID. We also had 12-hour waiting lines in, I think it was Austin, Texas. Even if you had a heart attack, it was a 12-hour waiting line to get into the ER. What is, to the best of your understanding, not being an expert in don't worry, nobody's recording this, so you're completely off the record.
I mean, I'm recording it myself, so that's an own goal for me.
Yeah. So, what is the status of and I think it's going to vary widely between state to state, but so an average here isn't going to give you a very good picture. What does the status of the U.S. medical healthcare system look like right now, do you think?
Yeah, I think pretty much exactly as you said. It's going to be very much stratified based on geography. I remember seeing a statistic earlier today that suggested Florida and Texas are responsible for 1/3 of all current COVID cases in the U.S. right now. So I actually did read some anecdotes about how some of the hospitals in Texas are again filling up to the point where cancer patients are not going to have a bed awaiting them after surgeries to remove their tumors and stuff like that because these ICU beds or other hospital beds are otherwise occupied by COVID patients. So we are starting to see surges again reminiscent of pre-vaccine times where we did have hospitals overflowing. I certainly hope we don't get back to the point where we have refrigerated trucks waiting out back as a morgue on wheels, because at that point that's when we start making wartime decisions about who's lived a long life, who has kids, stuff like that. Yeah, we don't want to have to triage people if we can avoid it. We want to obviously take care of everybody. But again, that also speaks to the power of vaccines, right? If there are heavily vaccinated areas, again, the principal benefit of a vaccine being keeping you out of the hospital and alive, those hospital systems, those pieces of medical infrastructure are going to be under monumentally less stress than areas where vaccination rates are low. And I will also kind of add, even though this is an American discussion, I will note the United Kingdom as a country that made a strategic decision actually to reopen to try and let Delta kind of burn through some folks in the summer, so that way the NHS does not get overloaded in the winter. So they kind of made a strategic decision saying that they have capacity right now, they could handle a spike, and they just wanted to let Delta have its way with some folks, especially around a school getting out. So transmission there would be lessened in the UK. So they made the controlled burn actually decision. And their case numbers are going back down, but I think that's a function again of their high vaccination rate. They were at 88 point something percent of the population who's had at least one dose. So that in and of itself kind of speaks to again the power that vaccines have. They were able to actually do something like that to spare the NHS a more gruesome fate in the winter. But I think we're in the United States almost on a similar trajectory for different reasons, and we don't have the vaccination rate to unfortunately recreate the same outcome here.
And would that be an example of, say, flattening the curve? So you normally get this huge curve, this huge spike in cases that overwhelms the system, and if you flatten it, you get the same number of cases, but over a longer period of time, so the system doesn't get overwhelmed. Is that roughly accurate?
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily the same amount of cases. I mean, obviously, hopefully, when you engage in all these efforts to flatten the curve, the total case count would be lower, because obviously the peak would be more flat. But generally speaking, yeah, the whole purpose, the whole meme, as it were, about flattening the curve back in the early days of the pandemic was solely to make sure the healthcare systems were not overrun.
All right, so now I've seen some recent data, and we are really back into that. And I keep saying logarithmic; it's exponential, and there's a difference. Don't you dare try to correct me or make me. This is my show, sir, my show. But there is the exponential growth. There's a mathematician in the live chat who will spank my ass if I, not in a good way, if at any rate. So. Yeah. So what we have is what I'm looking at is seeing that the exponential, the signature of the exponential growth, and you just see this huge spike as it's starting up from over, and I think it was 14 days ago we had about 2,000 new cases, 2,900 if I recall, and then yesterday it was close to 280,000 if I am remembering correctly. Don't hold me to that. So I mean that's quite a jump. Is there anything that you see in the future? What do you think is going to affect that either positively or negatively, and what do you think what is the U.S. strategy at this moment to deal with that, and what do you think we could do to improve that strategy going forward?
To improve the strategy in terms of keeping the medical systems from being overrun?
Improve in any way that improve to reduce the loss of life to the absolute minimum that it can be done.
Got it. Yeah, so generally speaking, my worldview is consistent with trying to preserve as much human life as possible, even if I don't like the other human life I'm trying to preserve. I still believe that all life is valuable and we should try and protect it.
Oh, yeah, well, listen, Nickelback, right? I mean, nobody's going to worry if Nickelback gets it, but at any rate.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to make a morbid joke, but I'm just going to pass. It might be against Twitch TOS, so I'm not going to.
Yeah, and I'm already, we try to, you and I had spoken earlier, and this is an educational program, and I think education can be dry, and I think if you can have a good time and have fun with it, I think it makes it a lot easier to sit through, but I also don't want to take away from the severity of the topic. So, yeah, I appreciate you. Maybe we can rein each other in a little bit, but please continue.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been advocating for the most, and I honestly think this should have been a day one Biden administration policy, but the policy of vaccine passports. So what that means, functionally speaking, and this is actually something, again, that other countries have implemented for other vaccines long before the pandemic, where you have to have, in this case, the COVID vaccine to functionally participate in society. So what that would mean is if you want to go to a restaurant, if you want to go to a bar, if you want to go to a movie theater, if you want to go to the grocery store to get groceries, you have to show proof that you were vaccinated. I will use the country of Israel as an example of this because they were one of the first countries to achieve a substantially high vaccination rate. Because they had a data sharing agreement with Pfizer that allowed them earlier access to vaccine shipments. And because of this, they felt confident enough to implement a vaccine passport policy where any Israeli citizen has an app on their phone where if they wanted to, again, go to a concert, go to a restaurant, they simply flash the green check mark on their phone app that proves they've been vaccinated that I think, again, runs through the Israeli government. And that's it. It's a way to ensure that public spaces where people congregate are safer than they otherwise would be. And things like, again, gyms, for example, people complain a lot of the time. There are certain streamers I see a lot of the time on Twitch that complain about having to wear masks and stuff at the gym because they don't know who around them has had a vaccine or not. So I think it would give the public a lot of confidence in knowing that what they're doing is safe and that the people around them, they don't have to treat with suspicion or paranoia. But functionally, in terms of preserving human life, that would also ensure that unvaxxed people are sort of kept functionally separate from vaxxed people. So that way they don't start chains of transmission that could result in then vaxxed people passing it to vaxxed people in these quote unquote, vaccinated safe spaces. I hate to, again, use that phrase safe space, but when we're talking about passport gated physical spaces. I think I'm mentioning this literally in terms of an area where people spend time. So vaccine passports, again, I think would overwhelmingly, it would force the people who are either hesitant or overtly anti-vax to reconcile what's going on in their head with the science. And a lot of the conversations that happened around vaccine hesitancy and anti-vax takes do not fundamentally either talk about the science or they are deliberate misinterpretations of science. So forcing people to engage with the idea of getting a vaccine to be in society would ultimately, I think, force people to loosen up what's rattling around in their brains and get their minds sorted, at least if they want to be in society.
You had mentioned earlier that the CDC appeared to be kind of downplaying in their use of language the necessity for masks. So you had said at one point that I thought was interesting. Well, the CDC isn't saying everyone should wear a mask. They're saying everyone in the red area should wear a mask. And it turns out everybody's in the red area.
Yeah.
Is there a reason, you think, for the way they are approaching this?
Yeah, so for people who watch me all the time, you'll hear me complain about the CDC all the time. I've actually gotten into arguments with other left-leaning people on other discords over what the CDC has done since the Biden administration came into frame. So I will just clarify, obviously, I would much prefer a Biden CDC compared to a Trump CDC because Trump CDC director, again, endorsed that natural herd immunity infection strategy, which is disastrous.
Did Trump have a CDC?
Lab leak skeptic.
I didn't recall Trump having a CDC. As I recall, all the information went straight out of the CDC and into the White House. The CDC was a paperweight, but please continue.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you say that, Trump's CDC director essentially functioned more as a political advisor rather than a physician, as his credentials would have suggested. So again, I at least think that the Biden administration CDC is closer to acting in good faith than a Trump CDC. But I think still fundamentally there are definitely errors that they have made all throughout their time overseeing our strategy in response to the pandemic. I think, again, the biggest one of them all has been their recommendation for the fully vaccinated to take off their masks in the middle of May. They coupled that with a deliberate decision to not keep track of breakthrough cases in the vaccinated population. So that combination of decisions basically ensured that vaccinated people would be congregating in spaces without masks because they now feel like they have the freedom to go in society and go quote unquote back to normal. And the CDC, again, miscounting or undercounting deliberately the rates of breakthrough cases in those vaccinated people, I think put us in this position where the virus changes, something like Delta shows up, and now we have something that is so transmissible because of its increased viral load, it is able to give people breakthrough cases and, again, penetrate the vaccine-induced immunity, at least for a time. And that, in and of itself, I think has begun to fuel this current surge of Delta that we're in. So I think that was truly, by all stretches of the imagination, an unforced error. The CDC justified that decision in May when they said fully vaxxed equals no mask by citing a lot of data from healthcare workers, both here in America and all around the world. And my sort of objection to that in terms of the science is that healthcare workers and the general population are two groups of people you can't compare. Right? Healthcare workers are more formally trained. They have a lot of formal education. They have a lot of practical education. They are mandated to wear PPE a lot of the time as a consequence of being a healthcare worker. They're always protected 24/7, 365, and they have distancing, of course, enforced in their jobs to some degree. So that is not representative of all Americans. Certainly not every single American is going to either have that education, have that personal protective equipment, or be social distancing constantly. So I really think it was a decision that was very tone deaf and out of touch with how real people act. I think they were too laser focused on any piece of positive data they could find to justify that decision. Again, I think ultimately this is building up to political reasons, but I'll keep that out of the equation here. But I think, again, they were trying to really use that as an incentive to try and convince people to get vaccinated as well. That was another benefit they claimed, but the vaccination rates do not reflect that. That incentive was a monumental failure, and again, now we have a substantial unvaccinated population that is helping to drive the Delta surge. That is the biggest error. I think currently they keep just shooting themselves in the foot when they don't just implement vaccine passports. Their efforts to get the unvaccinated vaccinated have been lackluster. I will say, it started with putting vaccine information on McDonald's cups, which
Oh my God,
people
I
are
hadn't
not
heard that one.
buying. They literally put like the CDC.gov website and like a little graphic saying, we can do this together on McDonald's cups. Like, people don't go to McDonald's for vaccine info; they go to McDonald's for the fast food. Like, you don't shove the information in their face; you shove the vaccine in their face. I'll clarify what I mean by that in a second. But there was the McDonald's cups. One policy that did at least have some degree of effect was free rides to vaccination locations for like 3 weeks through Uber and Lyft, which I think functionally just helped Uber and Lyft make a little bit more money. So that ended on July 4th when they decided to declare their independence from the virus. Joe Biden got up on a podium and rallied around our Independence Day and said we are independent from COVID, but the numbers would suggest otherwise. So I think that's another self-inflicted wound. And then from here, they've started to try and utilize social media influencers to try and convince people to get vaccinated. So they had Olivia Rodrigo, a TikTok pop star, show up at the White House to read a script for about, I don't know, a minute, and then she just walked off stage. There's a video now of Fauci and Olivia Rodrigo reading vaccine misinformation tweets, which doesn't help anybody. They hired another 2 additional influencers to try and peddle vaccine messaging on the internet. Again, I think this all reeks of an administration and a CDC that is fundamentally just out of touch with people. They don't understand how people think. They don't understand how people react to certain guidances. They don't understand what's really going on in the mind of the unvaccinated. So what I would have hoped the CDC would have done is to sort of do what the current state that I'm in, Vermont, the state that bears the highest vaccination rate in the country. I would really like to see them do what a lot of the local folks here in Vermont did, in the sense that what we had happen a lot is we shove the actual vaccine in people's faces, not literally in a syringe, shooting it into their eyeballs. But, when people were partying out on the beach or in the bars, there were vaccination clinics on the beach and in the bars. Like, it was such a convenience for people to just go out and party and drink with their friends. Like, oh hey, look, there's a vaccine. I could just get it here. Cool, let me do that. Stuff like that. I think when you make it convenient for people and you kind of just bother them. I actually read something earlier today about this, sending text message reminders, just saying, hey, your vaccination appointment is next week. Remember to bring some information and don't forget to go. Like, gentle reminders like that, just nudging people towards it, I think also had a pretty significant effect. So again, I kind of wish that rather than trying to play this like weird cultural angle, we just made the vaccine incredibly convenient for people, right? One population of folks that have not been vaccinated as much are people of color, more specifically African Americans. So they have concerns about the vaccine when it comes to things like America's history of medical racism and stuff like that. And a lot of those concerns are valid, but at the same time, even if they were to overcome those concerns, access to the vaccine or the ability to travel to a vaccination clinic in those areas is not something that's really that easy for them to do. We could go into Florida and how their governor actually siphoned vaccine away from these areas. But, again, like, more targeted outreach and more, I guess, in-your-face style outreach rather than this just kind of passive, we're going to pay other people and let it do it for us type of stuff. I really think they could be doing a lot more. But even on the higher order level, if you just want to take all of what I just said out of the equation, vaccine passports is just the hard full stop. You must have it. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Get a vaccine instead. So I think any combination of everything prior to passports, or just pulling the lever and doing passports. They could be doing any of that right now, and they're not. And I think ultimately this is more of a fostering a getting back to normal type situation where people are going back to work and then being productive again. But I really think that, of course, Trump CDC really seeded the foundation for where we are now, and they certainly did not help anything, and they were actively making things worse. But I think we're in a situation where we're not trying to make things better. So doing the bare minimum and not making it worse, awesome. But if we're not trying to make things better, then why do we have a CDC, right? It's in the name, Centers for Disease Control. They should be trying to control the disease, and I don't think they're trying as hard as they can.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. I did for a moment have an image of loading pepper spray canisters with vaccine and just unleashing on crowds, but that's probably not that's why I was smirking earlier, not to. All right, so So what we're going to do is I have a couple of remaining questions, and then we have gotten a few questions from the live chat. Anybody else in our live chat who wants to ask any questions, put them up. I will snag them if I can. I do appreciate the super chats we've had. It turns out we are getting the super chats. So this show is otherwise demonetized, so there should be no ads for anybody who's watching. It would probably, let's be honest, would probably have gotten demonetized anyway because YouTube doesn't like serious content. Not that I've ever been mistaken for serious content, but so and I've got a question that you're going to have to explain to me after I've asked it to you. But all that aside, I want to address a couple of remaining things. One that I really feel like I shouldn't have to, but I do. Now, earlier I would have said I shouldn't have to because it's a crackpot theory. This theory is now gaining some traction and enough traction, and there seems to actually for once be evidence to support it, that people are taking a serious look at this theory. But having said that, I honestly, my biggest concern about even mentioning it is I don't give a fuck about this right now. It could very well be true. It's not biggest on our priorities, but because people are talking about this, we have to have an honest conversation. Is there any possibility that this was man-made by a lab in Wuhan, China?
Yeah, so I think most scientists, I think if they're being intellectually honest and responsible, they will tell you, and they'll tell you what I'm going to tell you, is that, technically it's possible. Yeah, of course, anything is possible. But we have to talk about things in relative likelihoods. A lot of the media narrative around the lab leak idea has been one, I think, that is unfortunately heavily political and not actually based in science. Some of the people who were originally responsible for sort of putting this into the news cycle was actually one of the same people who peddled information from one Dick Cheney to help start the war in Iraq. So all of that to say, some of the same people back then are sort of regurgitating political propaganda right now. So if we're going to try and take the politics out of this and look at the pure science, right? What is the scientific likelihood that the virus came from a laboratory? Right now, that likelihood is extraordinarily low, and this is actually reflected in the World Health Organization's report about the origins. Now, of course, we'll talk about the WHO separately because people claim that it's a surrogate of China, but I think that's, again, more a political-based conspiracy theory. So in terms of the actual science, one of the features of the virus that I like to point to that people really never have an answer for lab leak supporters, there's one molecular feature of the virus, the pandemic virus. It's called the furin cleavage site, or we could just abbreviate it as FCS for short. This feature is something that was not present in other related viruses in the specific family that SARS-CoV-2 is in. SARS from 2003 and MERS, the Middle Eastern coronavirus from 2011, do not contain this feature, but this one does. Conspiracy theorists love pointing at this feature as proof that it actually was a deliberately engineered bioweapon. And this is actually something that Fauci and virologist Christian Andersen from Scripps National Laboratories actually looked at very early in the pandemic, as evidenced by the Freedom of Information Act leak of Fauci's emails. Essentially, the science of this is that if somebody actually made this virus on purpose in a laboratory and they put this version of this feature into the virus, they should be fired. And the reason why they should be fired is because the version of this feature they put into the virus is horribly inefficient and does not make the virus as infectious as it otherwise could be. They're not utilizing the full potential of a molecular feature like this. So as sort of additional evidence to support that notion, we've seen actually over time with these variants popping up, there are mutations in some of the variants, including Delta, in this molecular feature that actually make it more efficient. So if we're seeing natural selection occur in this feature, that suggests the wild-type virus was not as efficient as it otherwise could have been. If it was, peak optimization for human infection, we would not be seeing natural selection occurring in this region of the virus. So a scientist who deliberately chose to put that feature in there is not doing their job to their best extent, and again, should not be doing bioweapon research in that point. I think as someone in my chat just said, it's like strapping a shovel to a tractor and calling it a backhoe. So that's a really good analogy, Marcus. Thank you. But again, it's a really silly point, and it's something that Christian Andersen actually brought up again to Fauci in their email conversation. They sat down, they looked at the feature, and then they ruled it out, I think, for that reason, among others. And then Christian Andersen went on to publish a Nature paper about, I think it's called The Proximal Origins of the Virus, that anybody, I think, could look at. It's an open access paper where he goes into this in some degree of detail. But he basically makes the point that, again, the fact that these features of the virus are the way they are suggests that this was not man-made on purpose. It wasn't a bioweapon to make as many people sick as possible. But even if it was, that would imply they deliberately released it on their own country as a starting point, which is not the point of a weapon. If you pull out a gun to shoot somebody, you don't shoot yourself first and then shoot the other person afterwards.
Well, typically, no. So, I'm not an expert, but no, that strikes me as poor robbery skills. I don't lecture on the stuff, but. Well, yeah, that was the way you said it. Well, as far as I was thinking about the torturers for Kim Jong-un, and I was just like, you know what? If this is the best that Kim Jong-un has for torturing, they shall be fired. All right. Anyway, we got a $10 super chat from Patrick Lowinger. I'm going to say Lowinger. I'm going to realize I've talked to this guy like a dozen times, and I'm not sure I got pronouncing his name right. If I pronounced it right, it was totally on purpose. If I pronounced it wrong, it's our guest's fault. Quote: given the transmission pathology of a virus. Like COVID, the rate replication and pathogenesis, rather than talking about, quote, the flu, wouldn't it be better to compare it to RSV and or MERS?
So let me actually double check this question just to make sure I understand it correctly. We're trying to compare the virus to something like RSV or MERS.
Yeah, I think, and I think he's still in the live chat. I saw him a minute ago, so he can probably follow up on this. But I think he's talking about specifically because of the transmission rates and the rate of replication. A lot of people refer to it as a flu, and they say, "Oh, this is going to be like the flu. We're going to have to get shots every." I said, "Wouldn't it be a better comparison comparing it to MERS or RSV?"
Okay, I see. I see the super chat now. So I think when we're talking about comparing the virus to other viruses, we have to kind of first ground ourselves in what metric we're comparing it to. So in this case, I think if we're talking purely on a transmission basis, this is a term that epidemiologists, virologists, et cetera, use to categorize transmission rates of pathogens. This is called R0 or R naught. It's written on paper as a capital R with a subscript 0. What this number represents is how many people a particular germ or pathogen spreads to after one person gets infected. So if I was to get infected with a germ that had an R0 value of 5, that would mean on average I would make 5 other people sick. So this is something that actually is a moving target. This number changes based on case counts, and obviously it can change based on what the virus does. So this has actually been part of what the CDC recently came out with respect to Delta. They said that Delta is substantially more infectious than the wild type virus, and it was actually as infectious as some other pretty prominent viruses. I think measles was one of the viruses Delta could not beat out. I think they said it was as infectious as chickenpox. Let me actually, because I can probably pull this up pretty quickly.
Take time.
It's in the CDC's internal document. I could pull up the actual figure. I'm just waiting for the PDF to load now. Give me just a second, because I know exactly where this figure is. Here we go. So it's a Delta variant is more transmissible based on this R0 or R naught number. It's more transmissible than MERS and SARS, than Ebola, than the common cold, than the 1918 Spanish flu virus, and smallpox. And it is equally as transmissible as chickenpox. So, if we're trying to make comparisons to viruses, I think we have to make a comparison on a valid metric. And if we're talking transmissibility, yeah, that's a perfectly valid metric. But if we're talking about comparing it to the flu, this is actually more transmissible than a flu pandemic virus that killed so many people in 1918, right? What we're talking about, something that we kind of remember as a textbook example of what a pandemic is. The prior to COVID, the last once in 100-year pandemic that shook the world at its foundations was the 1918 flu, which started in Kansas but was called the Spanish flu. So, reasons. In that sense, I think scientifically that's kind of how I view it. I try and just view it as intellectualized as possible with actual hard numbers to support it. So the original version of COVID, it was roughly as transmissible as swine flu, as the seasonal flu, maybe a little bit more. A little bit more transmissible than MERS or bird flu or something like that. But we've kind of progressed beyond that point because Delta variant is just so remarkably transmissible.
All right. So, and then I've got this question, and you're going to have to. I don't. Wow. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. So, I think that this was not deliberately a good question. I'm sure, in fact, it's a trollish question, and the only reason it was asked was to
Oh
make me
no.
look like an idiot to try to ask this question. Well, you heard this question earlier, and you seem to actually kind of make heads or tails of it, but I still think this was deliberately designed to make me look bad, just trying to translate it into English, which I don't think can be done. So the question is about syncytia, I guess, Cyncytia, and why it's bad in the lung and in other cells, except for skeletal muscles. It's a troll. It's a known troll. I don't know. Somehow he was made mod on this channel, head mod actually. But he is a troll. We've tried taking his wrench many times. It doesn't work. It just comes right back the next day. So that's the question. That's from Titan.
Yeah. So, I mean that's actually a pretty valid question. So let's just define the word syncytia for a moment. Syncytia basically is a scientific word that essentially means cells that have fused together. This is actually, again, is a feature of biology. If we're talking about one pair of cells that is fused together, it's called a syncytium. That is the singular version of the word. But we're talking about syncytia, and of course that means there's at least one. So if we're talking about how this is relevant to human physiology, for example, I think he brought up skeletal muscle cells. The way skeletal muscle cells work actually involves deliberately having multiple cells fused together into one rather large cell, and this is by and large how muscle cells work. This is actually part of normal human biology. So in that sense, right, this is good. We want these things to happen as they are intended to. But when it comes to COVID, when it comes to the virus and our lungs, this is actually a more recent finding when it comes to the wide variety of things that this virus is capable of. So one of the tricks that the virus has up its sleeve to infect more cells in our body, to make more of itself and to, again, propagate itself to new hosts, is actually taking cells that it actually infects and gets inside of and tricking them to form these syncytia with other neighboring cells. And when that happens, the virus has essentially now gotten access to a whole new cell's worth of biological materials to make more virus, more protein synthesis factories called ribosomes to crank out more viral protein that gets assembled into more virus. It gets access to more fatty material that helps the virus actually replicate its genetic code and encapsulate or surround itself with protective lipids that help it hide out from the immune system. I think there is an article I could dig up and send to you, or I could just, I think, message it to Titan since I know how to get in contact with him. But it actually does show.
Everybody knows how to get in contact with him. He's on more channels than I was going to make a bad joke about Bordello in New Orleans on Bourbon Street, but I think I'll skip that. But nonetheless, everybody, Titan gets around. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Actually, I think there's a picture that I could show either one of you that actually scientists did do the actual experiments and looked at this under a microscope using some pretty neat fluorescence tools, and you can actually see one of these syncytium. Right, you can see one like massive misshapen lung cell that has acquired like 14 different nuclei, suggesting that it is fused with 14 other cells. So when we talk about a syncytia, it's not just one cell fusing to the other. It's one cell possibly fusing with dozens. Right? These things essentially just turn into these massive, misshapen, non-functional virus factories, which again helps the virus actually, again, get more of an advantage on the immune system and helps further the infection. Now, of course, the immune system does have tools in its arsenal to fight back. There are dedicated cells in the immune system that are, especially when the infection actually starts, they're put on alert to look for cells that have turned into virus factories to essentially take them out. So your immune system will go find these syncytia if they exist and get rid of them before they can make more virus. So again, we're going back to that evolutionary push and pull, right? We're watching the virus and learning more about its tricks and kind of comparing that to what our immune system has up its sleeve to either get ahead of the virus or to stop the virus from performing these tricks. But syncytium are one of the many tricks that this virus has, and it's a very academically fascinating trick.
All right. So I had another question, and now I've spelled. Yeah. So I think actually I caught all the questions. I have this nagging feeling that there was one there, and I'd rather not. So if anyone wants to drop any last questions in the live chat, I've got one. It's a terribly unfair question, actually, but it's one that sort of is on everybody's mind, which is why it's unfair. It wouldn't be on everyone's mind if it were easy to answer or if there actually was an answer. But I'm going to ask you this anyway. You're looking at the numbers. You've looked at this. I've looked at this. I have some idea of what's going on, but I look at the numbers. I'm trying to make heads or tails of where we're headed in the near future, maybe the next 6 weeks to the next couple of months, and I don't know. I think nobody knows. There's no way you could know. So I'm going to ask you, where are we headed? We'll do the standard form and paperwork that you are in no way offering medical advice, and you have absolutely no way to do it. But on the flip side, it's educated guesses. You got to be a little careful with, because educated guesses can cause panic. But on the flip side, you are the guy who started stocking up before everybody else did, based on an educated guess. So, we like to try to, if our guests can project and say, this is what I'm looking at. I don't know what I think it means. If that can be done, I'm curious to hear what you look at when you see the numbers where they are now, and when you look at the policies as we have it now. Where do you think we're headed for the short term, as in next 2 to 6 weeks, and midterm as in six to maybe 6 weeks to 3 months? What do you think we're looking at?
Yeah, so there's definitely certainly a lot to unpack there. I think as far as like where we're headed in the immediate short term, we're definitely, of course, in the midst of a Delta surge. It's going to be, I think, kind of difficult to prognosticate when it's actually going to peak. From what I've read, at least, I remember, I think President Obama's former CDC director, I think his name was, I think Tom Frieden. He was looking at the numbers, and he was kind of predicting we'd see potentially up to 200,000 cases a day by end of August, early September, as a sort of putative peak, or a possible peak of what we would see with Delta. I think that's plausible. I think the trajectory of Delta is largely going to depend, again, upon vaccine uptake and mask usage and distancing, right? We're kind of, again, back to a square 1.5, as it were. And I think these non-pharmaceutical interventions, these non-vaccination, non-pill things that we, again, have in our toolbox, I think we need to go back and bust them out again. The CDC is, of course, said as much for high transmission areas. I really wish the CDC, I think, would be a little bit more aggressive in just telling people, instead of just relying on them to read between the lines. I would rather them be very explicit and blunt about just saying, we're at a point where we probably need to mask up again, guys. You should mask up if you're in public. This is not a consequence of the vaccines. The vaccines are actually working really well, but rather this is because the virus has changed, the science has not. So that's one thing I really do want to emphasize with this Delta surge is we're here because the virus is different. The vaccines are still overwhelmingly effective at keeping people alive and out of the hospital. So as a consequence of that, I think the hospitalizations and the deaths that we are going to see in the short term are going to be largely consistent of the unvaccinated. That's what the data do reflect right now. So people who are not vaccinated are going to be bearing the brunt of human suffering and loss of life with this surge. So the vaccinated, they're definitely going to be breakthrough cases. By and large, vaccinated people still are not going to be getting as sick, especially when we talk about Delta. The vaccines are still pretty effective. Pfizer and Moderna, the numbers clock in somewhere between 70 to 80% efficacy in preventing any symptomatic COVID when it comes to Delta. So the vaccine science, I think, makes me reasonably confident that vaccinated people are still going to hold out okay. Some of the news, actually, that has just come out today, Moderna did reveal the existence of a Delta-specific booster. So this is very interesting because Pfizer has been advocating for people to get a third booster of the same shot that people got the first 2 times. I'm somebody who got Pfizer twice, so this is very interesting, right? The whole point of the messenger RNA technology is the fact that we could change the sequences of the messenger RNA in the vaccine to match the virus as it mutates, right? This is another very valuable tool we have in our toolbox in this evolutionary tug and push and tug, right? The virus tugs with mutations, we can rein it back in by changing the contents of the vaccine to more accurately match the virus's genetic code. So Moderna actually just unveiled the existence of it today, and I'm very excited about this because this is something that I had really hoped that the institution of science would do sooner than later, but I'm happy it's here now as opposed to never. So I think in the short term, again, you're going to be hearing about that in the news. I think they're probably going to have to do a brief phase 4 clinical trial, if I remember correctly, just to make sure there are no safety signals or other unforeseen issues with a changed messenger RNA sequence. But I could see in the fall, sort of in this midterm length in the next 6 weeks to 3 months, in the fall and the winter, we're definitely going to be hearing about boosters. I think they're probably an inevitability for folks who are, I think, 60 plus and immunocompromised or otherwise vulnerable. As far as for 18 or 12 to 12 to 60, that age group, Pfizer's data to me looked less impressive, and that's why the CDC and the FDA kind of came out when Pfizer was saying, "Oh, we need a third booster." They were like, "Hold on, hold your horses. We're not that far along yet. We're not doing that right now." Moderna's data, at least from what I glanced at it earlier, seemed to be actually a lot more impressive than Pfizer's, but also wasn't broken down by age group either, so that I kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. But I think in some capacity, boosters are going to be a thing in the mid to long term. Definitely, I think for people who are older, simply because their antibody levels decline faster. It's just an unfortunate feature of being that age. Everybody has to do it at some point. So I'll be probably complaining about that when we have COVID-72 in 2056.
Well,
But
when I said project into the future, I didn't mean quite that far, but I appreciate the effort.
No, but in reality, I think Delta is going to have to just burn itself out, right? The Delta specific booster is not going to be rolled out in time. I really wish it was, but I think for people who are still not getting sick with it, who got their vaccines the first time, who are trying to wear a mask, they're trying to do everything right. I think they're going to be the beneficiaries of having either a Delta-specific booster or my dream vaccine would actually be sort of like the seasonal flu shot, where they throw messenger RNA in there for multiple variants at once. So I could imagine them doing like a wild type plus alpha, beta, delta, gamma, a pentavalent vaccine, for example. That would be my dream to see, but I don't think we're getting that anytime soon. I'm just hoping for Delta in the midterm, for the Delta booster in 6 weeks to 3-ish months. And that's going to be incredibly important because we're going to be going into a fall/winter where we still have a substantial amount of folks, hopefully a declining number of folks who are unvaccinated, and they're going to be the ones responsible for sustaining transmission, even if it's on the decline from a Delta peak into the winter, which, again, winter comes, people go back inside, and this could fuel yet another surge. So hopefully by that point, we would have a Delta booster kind of in the equation, or at the very least, even if it's just the same shot as before, that undoubtedly, I think, is going to help some people. We don't know if that's going to help everybody, but it will help a non-zero amount of people, and that will be good. So in the winter, kind of in that 3-month period, we're probably going to see a resurgence of other viruses that are not COVID. And again, this emphasizes how good mask wearing is, because something like the seasonal flu, for example, we've seen very little of over the course of the pandemic because people have been wearing masks and staying away from each other. So transmission of the seasonal flu has been pretty much in the toilet. When we all start taking the masks off and congregating, we're going to start seeing that resurge, and that's going to happen, again, because herd immunity to those things are pretty much non-existent because we've all been separate from each other for the last year and a half. So you're going to see things like RSV, that was mentioned earlier. You'll see influenza/parainfluenza. You'll probably see more CMV, RSV. You'll see all sorts of different viruses that normally circulate at varying degrees. But we'll see a resurgence of that. And I think the CDC is at least trying to get ahead of this a little bit. They're recommending testing laboratories actually test for more than one virus at once when people are sick. So that's also, I think, something in our future. We're going to start seeing what are called a multiplexed test, or tests that can, again, test for COVID and the seasonal flu at the same time to hopefully give sick people some answers as we get into the fall and the winter. So I guess as a brief recap, I think Delta is probably just going to have its way with us for a little bit, unfortunately. I would, again, encourage people to mask up and distance, kind of like before, because that's what the CDC recommends. And most people in the country, I think 85% of all counties in the U.S. at this point in time are areas with higher substantial transmission that qualify for the CDC's advice to put your mask back on. At that point, once Delta kind of burns itself out into the fall, we'll probably see a decline and maybe another plateau. Hopefully, vaccination rates have gotten better. And then I'm hoping by that point in time, we'll keep that decline going, hopefully towards zero or as close to zero as we can get into the winter where, again, people are going to congregate and hopefully not give us yet another surge. So that's kind of what I foresee in terms of what's going to happen with us. As far as what's going to happen with the virus, I guess what my biggest fear is that we're not going to have this Delta plus or Lambda. They might show up. They might cause a handful of cases, but I'm not so much worried about that because the vaccines, again, are going to protect people from those, I think, in spades. My biggest concern is that we're kind of have the snowball rolling down a mountain where every new variant on the horizon kind of has one or two more mutations, and then, the next one has another one or two. But as these mutations accumulate, like snow accumulating on a snowball, it'll finally get to the bottom of the mountain. We'll have what is called an escape variant, or a variant that looks very little like what we were vaccinated against, and that could potentially put us really into a box where now it's as if we were not vaccinated in the first place and we're truly back to square one. Again, I think the likelihood of that is low considering how well the vaccines do protect people and considering how many people have been sick, but I still think it's very much possible. And the fact that we have all these variants and sublineages that are accumulating mutations still, if the virus can spread, again, it can mutate. So that's kind of my fear. I don't think it'll manifest in the short or midterm, but the long term, if I want to really project into the future, that is something I'm very much concerned about, is the fact that eventually we could get, say, from an undervaxxed continent like Africa. I think 1% of all people in America have had any vaccine at all. So those are numbers that kind of scare me, because a continent like that could function as a variant factory, and we could get something, in 6 months or a year that causes more surges because it looks nothing like what we were protected against in the current set of vaccines. So I think that's kind of where we're heading. I think eventually we'll get back to more normal, but I think it's probably going to take the better part of 2021 to approximate that.
So with the advent of boosters, would it be what would be the effect? Would it be harmful? Would it be more advantageous? For example, if you were fully vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine and got the Moderna booster?
Yeah, so the mix and match studies they're ongoing. I don't think we have a clear-cut picture with every combination and permutation of vaccines. We do have a little bit of evidence when it comes to some of them. I know they found that I think it was 2 doses of the AstraZeneca for our European friends, plus Pfizer after the fact, seemed to actually work really, really well, and gave sort of the peak immune response as far as any combination of vaccines they tried. I could be, misremembering the order, but the only mix and match study that I know of was either Pfizer or AstraZeneca. So that's not really relevant to Americans since AstraZeneca isn't authorized for use here, and it's not basically here at all. We send whatever AstraZeneca we're making to other countries, which is good, of course. But as far as Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, all the combinations of those, I think a lot of that is still ongoing. I think there's some data about J&J and Delta that isn't so good in terms of efficacy. So we might be seeing those studies actually accelerated when it comes to our Johnson & Johnson folks who have gotten one of those, because they are at least thinking about adding a messenger RNA booster to at least one dose to the Johnson & Johnson recipients. But again, that's just a theory at this point. The studies are still ongoing, and we don't really know enough to make a determination to say which one is more effective. I kind of have an inkling when it comes to that Moderna booster, because the data they put in their investor presentation that they released today actually look really good to me personally. But I'm not in power. I'm not the one making decisions. So for better or worse, that's what it is. I think we'll wait to see what the regulators have to say.
So is it true that you like cutie, patootie, puggy, woogie, big bozonga, warm mommy milkies?
Oh my God, Reed and Rap, you asked that question. So that's one of my chatters. Every time I'm on somebody else's show, he insists on asking that question. I will answer him as always. Of course, yes.
But well,
But
I think
still,
I think we've found the final answer to the show. That and we're having a discussion in the Discord, or not in the Discord, but in the live chat. It appears that the other answer is, of course, 42. So we're gonna wrap this up now, but. Do you think it'd be available maybe, and since you're on a Twitch stream, I don't know if immediately after this, but to join our Discord, hop into the VC, and maybe if anyone has questions they want to ask you, maybe you can answer a couple questions for our audience in the VC. Is that something you think you might be able to do?
I think I could probably meet you halfway on that, just because with Twitch TOS, having an uncontrolled voice chat is begging for me to get banned. Not that anybody in your audience would do anything crazy, but
Not that
it's
I'd
just
read
risk
a
that.
surreptitious live chat from somebody named Read and Rap that's asking you about the. Yeah, I have no idea what.
But no, I'm definitely more than willing. Like, if anybody wants to come by on the Twitch stream, I'm more than willing to talk. I'm also in your Discord too, so if people have questions, they can just at me. I'm usually fairly active too, so I'm more than happy to answer questions in that capacity as well.
Perfect. Well, if you've gotten this far, I hope that means you liked the stream. So a like and subscribe where isn't going to help us monetarily, but it helps us in the algorithm. So we really do appreciate it. And if you like the content, if you want us to have more content like this, that is one way to support us and help out. The link for the Discord is in the description. I wanted to say again, thank you. And if you any other questions too, put them in the comments below, and we read every question, and we'll get to them if we can, and we'll also pass them forward. So thank you very much for coming. I think this was very informative, and I've already actually gotten a number of compliments in the live chat from people as to the wealth of information you provided. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to come and join us. I really appreciate it, and we wish you the best of luck, and we'll have all the links you sent me in the description so that everyone can find you and go watch your Twitch streams. And thank you again.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about science. Scientists don't always get the light of day to talk about it. So any chance I can talk about the science, I will take. So again, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Not all. Thank you. Oh, and yeah, tomorrow, ostensibly, assuming just a scheduling note, tomorrow our open hang, 9 p.m. Assuming I'm not, one of the reasons I wanted to, I've been a little under the weather, so we were talking about rescheduling the show, but if we do, and if I'm sicker tomorrow and I can't do a stream, we didn't want to miss out. So if I'm doing better, we will have our regular call-in show and open hang at 9 p.m. Eastern, after dark. Thank you all very much. Good night.